And moving on with our sessions, I want to guys show you how to perform registration between FTD and FMC so we can actually manage our sensor. Of course, in this and also other sessions, I'm gonna keep using FMC for administration. This is the recommended way of controlling our FTDs. But before I will be able to configure something on our units, we will have to first register FTD to the FMC. So this is gonna require a working license. If you don't really have one, you can still activate the Eval license. This one is going to give you access to all FTD's features for, I believe, 90 days. The registration process requires a special tunnel to be built between FMC and FTD. This is needed to protect the communication. And this tunnel is going to be established between the FMC and FTD. So FMC is going to act as a client, FTD is going to act as a server. And the session is going to be built over TCP port 8305, as I explained in the previous session. Now, to make this work, the first thing that we will have to focus is going to be the configuration of the FTD. So we will have to connect to FTD using ideally SSH, and we will have to issue the configure manager add command. Now, this is going to open a local socket TCP port 8305 so that we can connect from FMC so we can build our secure encrypted tunnel. Okay, but before I show you the syntax on the CLI, I want to quickly show you my network. This is the topology that I will be using throughout most of the sessions. Okay, in this case, there is a special cloud, management cloud, that I use to communicate my FMC with FTD. So I separate the management network from the data plane. And as you can see, FMC uses 172.16.15.100, where FTD's interface BR1 is part of 172.16.13.0/24, and it uses 100 as its IP address. Okay, it is always a good idea, like when you do the registration for the first time, it might be needed to make some basic connectivity checks just to see if you can reach other device over IP. And now on FTD, I'm gonna say show the network, I believe is the syntax. Or on FMC, I'm gonna say IF a config, or maybe not IF config. Here I'm gonna say route dash M. I just want to quickly see if I have a default route so I know how to reach the other device. We see I have a gateway configured out of my management interface on FMC. We take a look at FTD, and this is my gateway. And this is my IP address. Okay, if we were now to ping, like if I were to ping from FMC, I'm gonna say ping 172.16.13.100. So I'm trying to get to the FTD, and we will have to issue this command with root privileges. So say sudo ping. We see we have connectivity. But what's gonna be kind of like misleading is that when you go to FTD and try to use the same syntax, because the ping command is still available here, 172.16.15.100, it is going to tell you that you don't really have a route to the destination. Okay, why is this the case? The problem we run into here is the fact that the device is trying to use the data plane interfaces to test connectivity, or in our case, the management port is kind of like separated. Management logical interface is kind of like separated from the ASA/Lina data plane. But if I say ping using the system option, 172.16.15.100, at this time I'm using the management interface, and I'm using the management routing table, which is obviously making my attempt successful. You could achieve a similar result if you were to go to the Linux command line on the FTD. And this one is using the right interface. You can say route -n. It uses the BRI1 port, which is my management port. So pay attention to those small details like that, because you may actually think that you don't have connectivity where all the routes and the default gateway are actually in place. All right, so what are going to be the next steps to move on with the registration? We just tested basic connectivity. In the second step, I'm going to use the configure a manager command. We are still on the FTD unit. And I'm going to say add manager. Or no, maybe before we will actually say show managers. Just to show you that we don't have any FMC defined on the FTD. And now I'm going to use the configure manager syntax, where I need to point to IP address of the FMC. So just to make it clear, we are now on the FTD, and we want to start listening for incoming TCP port 8305 connections from the manager, which uses this address 172.16.15.100. So this is what I will have to configure on the FTD. Okay, then I need to tell it what's the registration key. This is kind of like a passphrase that will allow us to build this secure connection with the management appliance. I'm gonna say first FTD. Then an optional step is to provide a NAT identifier, which is going to be needed when your device is placed behind a device that does a network address translation. So in this case, the address that you will provide on the FMC is going to be technically different from what's the physical address of the FTD. You have to specify this identifier to allow the devices to talk to each other. Okay, this is not needed in my case. There is no translation between the FTD and FMC. So we will just use this syntax. And as a result of this, we should see that there is going to be a TCP socket opened on the FTD, and this is going to be port 8305. So I'm going to say expert, and then I will use the netstat command -antp. I believe those options will give us the most useful output, and we will be looking for 8305. So it says I am now listening to incoming connections over this socket. Okay, next step is going to be to go to the FMC and specify the details from the devices and then device management tab. You'll have to specify the information of the FTD unit along with the passphrase. So passphrase in this case was first FTD. Okay, I'm gonna click on add button, add device. It says what's the host? This is talking about the IP address 172.16.13.100. This is FTD. Okay, FTD is gonna be the name. First FTD is my registration string, my password. I can also select an access control policy as a default policy. We will talk about this stuff in a different session. Just tell it what licenses you want to use. And you can also take a look at advanced options. This is where you can specify NAT ID and enable disable transfer packets option. And this option is pretty important because it allows FTD to send events to the FMC. To finish, we will register, and you'll have to wait a few minutes for the results, or just several seconds. It takes some time, maybe not necessarily minutes, but it does take some time to finish the process. Maybe in the meantime, let's also, so started registration. Let's also take a look at this on the Linux shell on both devices. So you see that the connection is actually established now. And this is IP address of the FMC. And this is my FTD. So this guy is acting as a client. This is my server because I'm listening on 8305. But at some point it will eventually change. We should see two tunnels to allow both devices to push some information in an encrypted way. And let's use the same syntax here on FMC. I'm gonna copy those options, and we see that it also says established. I am the client, this is the server. And now it also listens on 8305 to allow FTD to build a tunnel back to it. Okay, go back to the GUI. All right, it looks the registration was successful. And this is something that we will want to check on the CLI as well. I can use the show managers command or SF tunnel status. The show manager is just a general information about the registration. Go back to FTD, leave the Linux shell, go back to the default CLI and say show managers. What we should see here for the registration status is going to be completed. So this means that the secure connection was established. Let's take a look at FMC once again. Notice that we have two tunnels, one for each direction, like to allow both devices to push some information through those tunnels. And this means that we can now use FMC to deploy configuration on the FTD. Okay, the SF tunnel the status command, which can be also run as a script on the FMC. Let me just get to the root account and let's say go back to the root directory and list all of the files. Okay, going to the root directory was not necessarily needed in this case. And the result of the script and this command is going to be pretty similar. Actually, it looks it's the same exact stuff. Now notice what it is telling me here. I'm on FTD. It says RPC status 172.16.15.100. This is FMC. It says active. I build two channels, A and B, both protected with AES 256 encryption and SHA 384 hashing. This is my management interface and its IP address. We take a look at FMC. It says I build a channel with FTD, session is active, and technically speaking, I build two sessions, A and B, both protected with the same cryptographic functions.